Did you know that the death of Joseph of Egypt hides a fascinating secret? Something that few biblical characters had the chance to live and experience, but which became crucial not only for the story of his life, but also for the history of the people of Israel. Something that few people know is what happened to Joseph's body after his death, and behind this there is a deep mystery that connects the end of his life to the continuation of an entire people's journey. Joseph, son of Jacob and Rachel, was a man of faith, courage, and wisdom. His journey is marked by challenges, betrayals, and triumphs, but what few know is that he not only died as an important ruler of Egypt, but was also mummified, embalmed, and his body remained preserved for hundreds of years. But why exactly would Joseph's body need to be transported for centuries? What is the significance of this gesture and the impact of his last words? In this video, we will reveal details, not only of his death, but also of what happened afterward and what it meant for the history of the people of Israel. Imagine for a moment the scene: a man who went through so many trials, who had a life marked by distrust, rejection, and betrayal, but who, in the end, had the opportunity to leave an eternal mark on history. Joseph, with his unwavering faith, did not think only of his end. He knew that his death would not be the end of his story, but a crucial turning point for the life of his family and his people. He knew that the promises made to his ancestors would not end with him. On the contrary, he became a symbol of perseverance, faith, and trust in God. What he did after his death and the request he made with his last words, a request that reverberated for centuries, may be the great secret that many still do not know. And this, my friends, is what we will explore in this video. We will understand not only what happened to Joseph's body, but also what these actions teach us about faith, the continuity of God's plan, and trust in something greater, something that goes beyond our own existence. Joseph was Jacob and Rachel's favorite son, and from a young age, he was marked by something that many did not understand: his dreams. He had dreams in which he saw himself as a leader, with his brothers and even his father bowing down to him. These dreams were not just fantasy. They had a profound meaning, something that Joseph could not fully explain at the time. But in a family marked by intrigue and rivalry, these dreams were seen as an affront, a statement that Joseph had something that others did not have, something that his brothers could not accept. Jacob's favoritism toward Joseph caused great jealousy. The relationship between Joseph and his brothers was becoming unsustainable until one day, in a moment of anger and envy, his brothers decided to act. They sold him to a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants, separating him from his family forever. This betrayal was a significant turning point, not only in Joseph's life, but also in the future of the entire people of Israel. Joseph's fate was then sealed in Egypt, where he was bought by Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh. There, Joseph began a new phase of his life. The Bible describes Joseph as a man who prospered in everything he did. He gained his master's trust, being respected for his skill and character. His faith in God and his integrity were evident, even in a foreign land far from his family. But Joseph would face new trials. Potiphar's wife, attracted by his beauty and character, tried to seduce him. He, faithful to his master and to God, rejected her advances. This, however, led to a false accusation against Joseph, who was thrown into prison. Joseph's life seemed to have been turned upside down, but he never lost his faith and integrity. Even in prison, Joseph continued to stand out for his ability to interpret dreams. This ability to interpret dreams would become the key to his rise in Egypt. A crucial event was about to occur, and it would be Joseph's opportunity to change the fate of Egypt, and ultimately, the fate of his own family. Joseph's journey in Egypt was just beginning. After being unjustly thrown into prison, he remained steadfast in his faith and continued to stand out for his ability to interpret dreams. This skill, which seemed a mere curiosity, proved crucial for his ascension. It was during his time in prison that he had the first glimpse of his grand future. Two important prisoners, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, were incarcerated along with Joseph. Both had disturbing dreams that they could not understand. Joseph, with his divine ability to interpret, offered his help, and after hearing the dreams, gave them clear explanations. For the cupbearer, he predicted a restoration to his position, while for the baker, Joseph announced an imminent death. Joseph's predictions came true, but the cupbearer, who had his fortune restored, forgot about Joseph, failing to fulfill his promise to help him out of prison. Years passed, but Joseph never lost faith. Life in prison, though difficult, was a preparation for what would come next. The moment of change finally arrived when Pharaoh had a dream that no one in his kingdom could interpret. Pharaoh's dream, filled with fat and lean cows, abundant and starving grain, was enigmatic. It was at this moment that the cupbearer remembered Joseph and his ability. Joseph was immediately summoned to the palace to interpret Pharaoh's dream. Joseph, with divine wisdom, explained that the dream meant 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of devastating famine. He suggested to Pharaoh that he store grain during the years of abundance to survive the great scarcity that was approaching. Pharaoh, impressed by Joseph's clarity and wisdom, recognized the exceptional ability of the man who had been a prisoner. He not only freed him, but appointed him governor of all Egypt, placing him in charge of the entire food supply of the kingdom. Joseph went from prisoner to one of the most powerful figures in Egypt, responsible for ensuring that the country survived the famine. His rise was meteoric, but it was also grounded in his unwavering faith, integrity, and exceptional skills. Under his leadership, Egypt thrived during the years of famine, and the nation prepared to face the crisis with the assurance of having the necessary resources to survive. The story of Joseph, though filled with victories and achievements, would not be complete without the moment of redemption and forgiveness that ultimately reflected his unwavering faith and Christian character. When famine struck not only Egypt, but also the land of Canaan, Jacob's family was forced to go to Egypt in search of food. It was at this moment that, unbeknownst to him, Joseph's brothers, those who had sold him as a slave many years before, came into his presence. Joseph, now a man of high standing, effectively a ruler in Egypt, recognized them immediately, but they did not recognize him. He was now dressed like a high-class Egyptian with authority over those before him, but more importantly, he had changed in a way that his brothers could not foresee. However, Joseph did not reveal himself immediately, and in an act that surely generated tension and even anguish, he tested his brothers. Joseph put them through several challenging situations, creating moments of apprehension to see how they would react, if they would still maintain the same behavior as when they had sold him. But instead of seeking revenge, he was overcome by a deep desire to restore the broken relationship with them, reflecting in each of his actions the faith that had always guided him. He wanted to know if his brothers had changed, if they would regret their actions. It was when Joseph saw that his brothers' hearts had been transformed that he revealed his true identity. In a moment of emotion and release, he disclosed that he was the brother they had sold years ago. The shock was immense. His brothers were stunned, terrified, fearing the revenge that might follow. However, Joseph, with a generous heart full of faith, did not reproach them nor hold against them the evil they had done. On the contrary, he forgave them. Joseph, in his words, revealed something fundamental. Though you acted wickedly, God used this for good, to save lives, to preserve our father's lineage. He understood that despite the evil done by his brothers, there was a divine plan behind it all. He not only forgave them, but recognized that his life, his challenges, his victories, and even his losses were under the sovereign control of God. This act of forgiveness, of restoring broken family ties, was one of the clearest demonstrations of faith and mercy. Joseph did not allow himself to be consumed by bitterness or a desire for revenge. Instead, he showed that true greatness comes from the ability to forgive and to see beyond human failings, trusting in God's plan for all things. Joseph, now an elderly man, had the privilege of living a prosperous life, surrounded by his family, respected by Pharaoh and the Egyptian people. However, despite all his honorable position, he never forgot the divine plan that God had for him and for his people. His life was marked by unwavering faith and commitment to God's promises, something he passed on until his last days. When his days came to an end, Joseph, fully aware that he was about to die, summoned his brothers. He wanted once again to reaffirm his faith and convey an important message that would resonate for generations. Even in the face of death, he did not look at the end of his life with sadness but with hope, because he knew that God's plan for his people would continue. Joseph made a request with such strong conviction that his brothers, upon hearing it, might have felt surprised, but they knew he was not speaking of something simple. He asked that when God visited the people of Israel to deliver them from Egypt, his bones be taken to the promised land. It was not merely a desire to be buried in Canaan, it was a prophecy about the future liberation of the people of Israel. This request was more than just a personal wish. Joseph was affirming his faith in the fulfillment of God's promises, despite not knowing how and when it would occur. His trust was in something much greater than his life or death. He trusted that God would fulfill his promise to bring the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob back to the promised land Canaan. He believed that God would liberate the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt, even if that happened many generations later. Joseph knew that despite being a man of great standing in Egypt, his true legacy was not in the land where he had lived and prospered, but in God's promise for his people. He firmly believed that his death did not signify the end of God's purpose for his family, but merely the beginning of a new phase when God would fulfill his promises of liberation and restoration. These words were not spoken lightly, but with a faith that transcended time. Joseph was more concerned about the future of his people than about his own life or death. He knew that his confidence in God's promises was what truly sustained the story of the people of Israel, and his prophecy would be fulfilled many years later, with Moses leading the people to freedom. After the death of Joseph, the impact of his life and his last words resonated deeply among his family and the people of Israel. However, what would happen to his body was equally significant, not only from a physical standpoint, but also a spiritual one. Joseph, being a man of high position in Egypt, received a rare honor reserved for figures of great prestige. He was embalmed according to Egyptian funeral practices. Embalming in Egyptian culture was not merely a procedure to preserve the body. It was a profound spiritual practice, based on the belief that the body needed to be preserved intact to ensure that the deceased soul could continue its existence in the afterlife. This ritual involved a series of meticulous steps: the removal of internal organs, the dehydration of the body with natron, a special salt, and the treatment with resins and aromatic oils. The goal was to prevent decomposition, ensuring that the body was preserved for life after death. Although Joseph was an Israelite, his position in Egypt as the second most powerful man in the kingdom justified that he be treated with great reverence by the Egyptians. This embalming was not only a tribute to his prominent position in Egypt, but also a symbol of the relationship between the Egyptians and the Israelites. Joseph, despite being a foreigner, enjoyed a high status, something that few other non-Egyptians could even dream of achieving. However, the spiritual significance of Joseph's embalming goes beyond Egyptian practices. By being embalmed and placed in a sarcophagus, Joseph, in a way, became a symbol of the continuity of his people's faith. His death and the respect shown to him by the Egyptians did not signify an end, but rather a transition toward the fulfillment of a promise from God. Joseph's body, preserved as an act of reverence, represented the continuity of Israel's story and the hope in the fulfillment of divine promises. When Joseph requested that his bones be taken to Canaan, he was not merely planning his burial. He was, in fact, leaving a legacy of faith and trust in God. Even after his death, his faith that God would fulfill his promise of deliverance was reflected in his request that his bones be taken to the promised land. Thus, Joseph's embalming, more than an Egyptian ritual, became a symbolic way of ensuring that despite his death, God's plan for the people of Israel would continue. His faith, preserved just like his body, was destined to be part of the great divine design for the deliverance of God's people. The death of Joseph of Egypt, while a tragic event, is not the end of his story. Rather, it marks the beginning of a new cycle for the people of Israel. His life and death leave us with powerful lessons about faith, perseverance, and trust in divine promises, elements that can be directly applied to our daily lives. Joseph was a man who faced immense difficulties, from the betrayal of his own brothers to being falsely accused and imprisoned. Yet, he maintained his integrity and unwavering faith in God, trusting that despite the adversities, God had a plan for his life. Throughout his journey, Joseph teaches us that faithfulness to God does not depend on external circumstances, but on our trust in his promises. When he was wronged, sold into slavery, and later imprisoned, he could have rebelled, lost faith, or succumbed to despair. But instead, he continued to trust in God and excelled through his skill and wisdom, which ultimately led him to become one of the most powerful men in Egypt. Joseph's attitude of forgiveness towards his brothers is one of the greatest examples of practical faith. When his brothers came to him, fearful of retaliation for having sold him, Joseph did not use his position to take revenge, but forgave them, recognizing that everything that happened was part of God's divine plan for good. True greatness, as he showed, lies in the ability to forgive, to look beyond the faults of others, and to recognize God's sovereignty in all situations. Moreover, Joseph's request for his bones to be taken to Canaan when the people of Israel were freed reminds us of the importance of maintaining faith in the future, even when it cannot be directly seen. Joseph knew that his death would not signify the end of his story, but a transition to the fulfillment of God's promises for his people. His confidence in the future and the certainty that God would fulfill his promises even after his death serve as a powerful example for us. In our own lives, we can apply Joseph's lessons when facing difficulties and uncertainties. We can learn to maintain our unwavering faith, to forgive those who have hurt us, and to trust in God's promises even when the paths seem uncertain. Joseph's story teaches us that, like him, our faith should be grounded not in the circumstances that surround us, but in the assurance that God has a greater plan for each one of us. The story of Joseph of Egypt is undoubtedly one of the most powerful lessons of faith, perseverance, and trust in God's promises. His life, marked by betrayals, injustices, and immeasurable challenges, is an example of how, even in the darkest moments, we can trust that God has a greater plan for us. The way he dealt with his adversities, with his forgiveness and vision for the future, is an inspiration not only for biblical times, but also for today as we face our own difficulties and challenges. Just like Joseph, we can learn to maintain our unwavering faith even when things do not go as planned. We can, like him, look at our struggles and believe that God is with us in every situation, guiding us toward his perfect plan. The story of Joseph is a reminder that even when we face betrayal, pain, or loss, God is working in our favor and has a purpose for our lives, something that goes beyond what we can understand at that moment. Joseph not only lived a life of integrity and faith, but also left a lasting legacy, showing us that true greatness lies in living according to divine principles, in forgiving, in trusting God's plan, and in waiting with patience and hope for the fulfillment of the promises. He teaches us that death is not the end, but a transition to something greater, and that just as he trusted that God would free his people from Egypt, we can trust that God will always fulfill his promises to us. Now, we would like to hear from you. How have you been dealing with challenges in your life? Have you maintained faith just as Joseph did? Please leave your thoughts in the comments about the story of Joseph and how it can be applied in your life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and share this video with friends and family who also need to hear this powerful message of faith and trust in God. If you want to continue learning more about profound biblical stories and how they can transform your life, consider becoming a member of our channel. As a member, you will have access to exclusive and early content that will help you grow spiritually and apply biblical teachings in your daily life. Thank you for watching, and we hope this story of faith inspires you to trust more and more in the divine plan for your life. May God bless you abundantly. Until the next video,